Trying something new with this episode. It is a very biased episode. I am wearing my IU. I've got IU behind me all the time, but I'm actually wearing IU stuff right now. This is something I did with Dr. Galen Clavio, who is a professor at IU. He's an associate dean of the media school, and runs a podcast network covering IU football and IU basketball. And what I wanted to do was I invited him on a while back with the intention of basically making this a case study for IU athletics. And I know that's been dissected a lot of places, but this I think is definitely biased, but it's also to try and, bring practical stuff to administrators at other schools of some of the questions that I ask. And we both offer opinions on this. I've been watching IU football since 2003, and I'm about to finish my third IU degree. Dr. Clavio has all his degrees from IU. He's been a professor for, well over, 15 to 20 years now. He's been affiliated. And we're going to talk about a lot of stuff here. And you're going to see the artwork on here is from my 10-year-old that he just looked at a picture after watching Fernando run it in on 4th and goal in the national championship. So I'm going to show off that. And he'll be in there a little bit more too. It's just kind of a fun way. This is just something very localized here in Indiana, but I'm still sharing it because I think I want to put a cap on last year, but also look ahead to college athletics as everybody starts their spring ball and just put it behind me. But really had a fun time recording this and wanted to share it regardless. If you can get something, I hope, but I really, after doing this for 6 years, I've done pretty much a good job of being, all things to all schools, but IU kind of hits different, and I just wanted to produce something for that. So I hope you get something out of it. Thank you for watching Higher Ed Athletics. Today I'm joined by an IU professor and really just a longtime IU football fan, I guess is how I would describe this episode, Dr. Galen Clavio. Galen, thanks for joining me on the podcast, and we're going to talk about really unscripted about IU.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, so my background knowing you is I remember I went into the master's program, sport management at IU. I went to like the first day thing that we were supposed to go to, kind of like an orientation to the program. And the way everyone told me, like, oh, you got to try and get Galen. So that the semester that you had split over into the media school.
Yeah.
And so I was always bummed. I kind of followed you from afar with social media, and but then in my time at IU, I realized how much work you do on campus with the sports media program. So instead of me attempting to introduce you, what's kind of your affiliation with IU everything?
Yeah, it's a long list. I'll try to summarize it. So I am a professor at the media school, and I run the sports media program, which we've basically kind of grown from an adjunct part of the sport management program 20 years ago to something that's now on its own, got over 300 students. I also run this thing called the National Sports Journalism Center, which helps to connect the school to the sports media industry. I'm also associate dean at the media school for undergrad. And then I've just got a long-standing history with the institution. I'm a fourth-generation IU person. I did my undergrad here, got my PhD here, and I've been teaching here for 16, 17 years now. So it's been it's a lot of different things, and it's all a lot of fun.
Yeah, and so the reason I had asked you to come on here is because my higher ed athletics audience are practitioners and ADs in college athletics space, and they all know, those that have watched and listened, I hammer down sometime that I'm an IU person, but this one, I've never really done a deep dive on like a case study of IU. I have a unique background, so I did I have 2 IU sport management degrees, and then my doctorate. I'm doing my dissertation this semester on the same type of stuff I talk about on the podcast. But mine, I decided to go into higher education, student affairs. About 6 months into it, I really regretted not just sticking with the PhD with you all, but the same PhD you had did. But I really just, I have a lot of affiliations to IU. Worked for President Whitten for a year as her assistant in Indianapolis, in the athletic department for about 3.5 years I was the transfer portal person when it started under Tom Allen. And, we talked about 40 something, I think, people with a roster turnover with him. It was kind of the first go with the transfer portal. What people don't see is all the evaluations you do for the people that don't go.
Right.
And Josh Hoover, I think, is someone that I did an initial evaluation on when I was still in compliance. And then, like you, a lot of IU football hardship. I was thinking in my head throughout this whole playoff run when I started, and it was 2003 is when I have not missed a game, IU football game, since 2003. At least watching it on TV. And you've been to a lot, but we've been through a lot as fans. And so what I want to talk to you about is through your platform, Crimson Cast, and you can share about that with the Back Home Network. I've got my home field apparel national champs. I know
Love
they're
it.
a sponsor for you, so I had to get the comfortable.
I had my home field national title shirt down here. So, and I'm
Yes.
the post championship swag is supposed to be showing up at the house, I think today or tomorrow. I got the shipping notification just yesterday. So
Yeah, my Sports Illustrated feature magazine's not coming until Sunday, but I was hoping to have it by now. But yeah, we just had to milk this, like just soak this stuff in as the champions. But first off with Crimson Cast, maybe explain that, and then you were with the whole playoff run. I think you went everywhere. What was just that experience like? Whether like between Crimson Cast and physically going to all these games?
well, I'll start with the going part because that was a ton of fun, and it was one of those things I told myself after a lifetime of hardship watching IU football, I was going to go to every meaningful postseason event that I could. And so, the Big Ten championship game was the first aspect of that up at Lucas Oil Stadium. That one was easy, and that was a magical experience, and the game was amazing. But just being around that many IU fans and having a touch point with them from having done the podcast was really special because when you get recognized by people because of your IU fandom and because you've been doing things online in relation to the brand, that's nice. So the Rose Bowl, myself and Alex Paul, who is the social media content guy for the NIL Collective here, we decided we would do a little social media campaign and drive out to Pasadena. So we dubbed it the Stampede to Pasadena in honor of the Bison mascot that just got restored. There you go.
This one
And,
doesn't look like him at all, but this was
well,
my son grabbed this.
and I have some Bison up here who don't have IU on them, but they're we cobbled together. They have yet to make some really official, nice looking Hoosier the Bison plush toys. We'll work on that this off season, I think. But no, being at the Rose Bowl, being there the day before, seeing all the IU fans, being there for Indiana having a 35-point win over Alabama, it was just, as a fan, was just a truly special, transcendental moment. And same thing with it, Atlanta for the Peach Bowl, beating Oregon, and then obviously the national championship game was just surreal in so many ways. With the podcast, so the podcast has been an interesting story. I mean, we've been podcasting much longer than people have been listening. Started the podcast in 2009, and it was really an idea that me and Scott Caulfield, who's the co-founder and co-host of the show, we had done college radio together here at IU as undergrads in the late 90s, and that was just on the student radio station. Radio was not something you did communally with your friends, and then podcasting comes along in 2006, 2007, and it's like, oh, there's a way to do this. And so we started an IU football and basketball podcast. Not many people listened. Not many people paid attention. Got a little bit of traction from basketball during the 12-13 season. But it really wasn't until 2018, 2019 that I feel like it really penetrated the football audience. And we had the advantage of being one of the very few places that regularly did a podcast on football. And so when they got good in 2024 under Curt Cignetti, people are like, I need information on football. Where do I go? And we were fortunate to be one of the places that people went. And so that just has mushroomed over the span of this last 16 months. And, it's an interesting spot to find oneself in as a professor who's also doing content as basically a hobby when you kind of feel like the cultural liaison for the football fan base. And that's been a lot of fun. We did events in all three locations. They all not only sold out, but we had lines out the door. And these are basically just fan meetups that we're doing. But it's really cool to be part of the zeitgeist, so to speak, of what's been going on with IU football, and it's something I hope that we're able to continue to do for a long time. And it's, it's become kind of a side business now as much as any.
Yeah, and we talked. We both referenced our home field apparel. So the home field apparel founders, they were IU students, and so probably interesting for them. I mean, they pretty much everyone that listens to this, odds are the school they work at has home field licensing to make gear, and so yeah, it's just an incredible experience for him. I'm sure too. Seeing some social media of him in the crowd there. I want to get to how this all started, and so just to sum up everything, there'd be years that IU, they could produce offense, but their defense would give up 50 points a game. They would then under Tom Allen, they would have a really good defense. Offense would struggle sometimes to move points, and we just never could get it at the same time. So they move on from Tom Allen, who was always good for me when I worked with him. My twin brother was on his staff as his video director, and thought the world of him as a person. But the coach, going with Coach Cignetti, and I know you've been asked this before about your initial reaction. I think Scott Dolson places has laid out that he was wanted a sitting head coach. But kind of what was your reaction as a fan, but also as a professor, thinking about IU? I mean, this was a good hire, obviously looking back, a great hire, probably the best ever. And what's also interesting, I don't think anyone repeated that cycle this year of other than trying to find the next JMU coach, but
Right.
no one really went back. What do you think about the hire, and what Curt Cignetti brought with him? Because I have my thoughts too.
Well, I mean, in retrospect, it was a brilliant hire. I think at the time it made sense because, my contention had always been, and I'd said this through several cycles, that the Indiana job is not the type of job where you can learn to be a head coach on the job. And you go back and look at the various coaches that IU had had. I mean, yes, Bill Lynch had some prior experience as the Ball State coach, but he was not really well suited from a temperamental perspective, I think, to coach in the Big Ten. And it's not a negative on Bill Lynch as a person. It just, he didn't really have the type of competitive pursuit, I think, that really would match what he was going to have to face against the top teams. Kevin Wilson was a brilliant offensive mind who I think struggled with the logistical aspects of running a football program. And I think Tom Allen kind of fit into the similar category. And, Allen was better about he could hire the right assistants and they would have, really good success, but he was very dependent on his assistants being the ones that were operating the business, so to speak, of football. And so where I think Cignetti was a brilliant hire was he brought, like, Cignetti loves the logistics and the management of running a football program. And it's one of those things where people oftentimes confuse X's and O's and acumen around being a schematically brilliant football coach and understanding that you're basically running a large business as the CEO, and you got to know how to delegate, and you got to understand what's important, and you got to understand what buttons to push with people in order to get the whole organization moving in the right direction. So I think that from that perspective, he was exactly what Indiana needed. And in a similar vein to how Bill Mallory was the right coach for Indiana back in the 80s, because he had all that experience having been a head coach up to that point. But I also think where Indiana was real smart was they said, okay, we trust this guy. We're going to let him bring his vision. I don't know that you would have gotten that at a lot of other schools that were quote unquote football schools, because there's a lot of rust and calcification on the machinery of a football program because your athletic director generally thinks they know best how to run things. You've got boosters who think they know best about how to run things. The idea that, you're going to come to the Big Ten, but you're going to bring your essentially entire group of 5 coaching staff with you, except for the offensive line coach who he retained from Tom Allen. Like, that normally doesn't happen. It's somebody like, no, you need to get a power conference level offensive coordinator because your stuff isn't going to work at this level. Cignetti was allowed to bring in his vision, do what he wanted to do, and IU basically took the approach of, we're going to give you the financial resources that you say you need, and we're going to trust you. And I think the early success that Cignetti had justified his own contract extension in the first year, extending and retaining almost his entire coaching staff from the first year to the second. And now it's become a model where it's like, well, why let your assistants leave if you can just pay them the money to keep them there if they're doing a good job? It got Indiana out of the cycle of being a minnow in the pond with the predator fish. Like, no, we're going to actually pay to keep all of these folks in place. And that has such a positive impact on the way the organization runs. So it was a great hire, but it was also, it took IU being more upfront about how to run things in order to make it work.
You know what I think was undersold? I know maybe you went back and watched the broadcast, but of the Rose Bowl game, it was hardly ever mentioned that the Alabama coach, their coordinators, and their strength coaches all used to be at IU.
Yep.
And under Tom Allen, and they lost the strength coaches to Saban, and then the coaches went on their own way. Kane Womack went and been a head coach for a little bit, then ends up at Alabama. But that was part of the assistants that you're talking about that they couldn't keep. They went on and then were playing for them in the Rose Bowl, but the broadcasters like kind of pretty much painted right over that. But as someone that hires coaches, that people are going to be listening to this, I think that's something that's a prime example of what you were just talking about.
Yeah, so much of it really does come down to, like, if you have good people, you need to figure out a way to keep those people, but you also have to be a place where they want to be. And I think, well, the problem Indiana's always had is that you succeed at Indiana and it's always been a stepping stone to somewhere else. It's a problem I talk about a lot. Like, I've always felt that European soccer and college football share a lot of DNA in terms of how they are, how like job progression and the core top programs or teams versus the ones underneath them interact with each other. There's always this trail up because you're always trying to get one of the top 3 or 4 jobs. So how do you become a top job yourself? When you lose David Ballou and Ray to, those were the strength and conditioning coaches, when you lose them to Alabama, it's a no-brainer. Of course they're going to go work for Nick Saban at Alabama. But we're kind of in an era now where if you're willing to pony up the cash and you've got everything in the system that would allow you to be successful, there's no reason why a school like Indiana, with as much money as it's got and its alumni base and its facilities, like, why can't you be competitive to keep people? And so the Tom Allen defenders would sometimes complain that he didn't get enough financial support from the university. And there may be some truth to that, but it was also a different era even 4 years ago or 5 years ago in what you could reasonably do. And I also think that there's 2 sides to that vision, where if you don't completely trust the person that is asking for the resources to be able to execute with the resources, there may be some reserve on the part of the organization about whether it's wise to go through with that. And so I think there's a lot of that has to be considered as you're trying to think about how all this gets organized and utilized in this current environment.
Yeah, and I would go back as we're kind of going. I'm just trying to break through the ice of like everything IU, knowing that pretty much no one listening really understands what you and I probably do about the place. Is Fred Glass was the AD before Scott Dolson. Scott was, his deputy for like 10 years, running the varsity club, things like that. Scott is not going to be out there publicly all the time talking about, he's just not like that. He'll do the interviews and stuff that he needs to. But Fred was on the podcast, Hired Athletics podcast, early on when he wrote his book, kind of outlining his career after he was leaving. We had met, and facility wise, he is a big stepping stone that IU had to get to even get to, probably to even like stay even remotely competitive in the Big Ten. When you talk about the stadium, not that long ago, folks, did not have a north or a south side of the building. It was basically just built, and there would be people, rolling down the hill watching the games there. And then they finally closed it, and Scott kind of took the baton there. The Assembly Hall got renovated to Simon Scott Assembly Hall, and that had to be modernized under Fred and Scott too. But that is another building piece, I think, over the years, that it's not sexy to just, we're going to close the building. But now think how much that return on investment paid off, because now they're going to try and do more things to the stadium. I did their like huge survey about what they're wanting to do. But it basically resulted in a lot more seats, a lot more VIP style things there. And so I just want to kind of give Fred Glass his a tip of the hat to him too, as well.
I worked with Fred for many years. I respect what Fred did. And look, I don't think that you can understate how bad IU athletics was in terms of facilities and in terms of just the overall structure of it in 2007, 2008. You didn't just have the Kelvin Sampson situation blow up, but you had about 25 years of facilities neglect. And it was part of the problem that Indiana had was that there was a real power vacuum. And that's a whole nother podcast that we could go into that occurred right around when Bob Knight got fired. And there was kind of a tug of war over who was going to control athletics, which meant nothing really got done for several years. And that was right at the time when most of IU's competitors' schools were making huge facilities investments and they were making huge investments in coaching staffs and everything like that. And Kevin Wilson talked a lot about how when he first got to Indiana in 2010, it was a lot of just like, hey, like this is not how big time college football programs operate. Like, down to like training tables and transportation and just little basic things. And so, I think Fred had to slowly pull a bunch of people inside athletics and outside athletics, but in the broader university structure, along with the idea that facilities do matter and investment does matter. And you have to put money into these things and it will eventually pay off. And all the things that have happened since they announced the north end zone facility upgrade where they enclosed the north end, they eventually enclosed the south end, they eventually do the assembly hall upgrade, they build Cook Hall, they build like several different facilities around campus that have helped to modernize IU athletics to where now it's a very modern, up-to-date athletics facilities spread. It just wasn't like that 15, 20 years ago. It really is remarkable how much they did in a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, and like the wrestling and volleyball venue is just incredible too, and it's right next to Cook Hall, and yeah, they have all these facilities. They've got work I know they want to do on the indoor and a new press box, things that were just really like the more modernizing of it, but still from where it was. I just wanted to point that out because people listening, I do think you could luck into hiring a really good coach, but they also those coaches know what they need, and Curt would be the first to tell you that there was things that still needed to be updated, but clearly it had gone in the right direction. Another thing that I think is a big stepping stone is this is nothing. This is not a slight to President McRobbie, but he showed pretty little interest in athletics as a president of a Big Ten university, and Pam Whitten. A lot of people at IU, you either like her or you don't. She was great to me. She was a great leader. I feel like I got a master's degree learning from her every day in the year that I was working for her. But she loves sports and she knows what she's doing with sports. And so whenever Scott comes with that approach about hiring Curt Cignetti, and she'll tell you we have the best athletic director in the country. I think people don't realize like Pam did not hire Scott. Scott was hired pretty much towards McRobbie's way out, and so that had to be trust too by President Whitten. But they work so well together, and getting to see Scott in that role that he played on the cabinet too. But how much credit do you think Pam Whitten deserves for this whole turnaround?
Oh, I think she deserves a lot of credit for it. Look, one of the things I think that's important to keep in mind about Indiana specifically, like this university, is that it's got great academics, in several different areas. Kelley School of Business is, among the top public business schools in the country. Jacobs School of Music is among the top music schools at a public institution in the country.
That media school is no slouch either.
I mean, we've got a lot of great academic programs. And I would say, just based upon the public statements and what we witnessed, there's always a tug of war, it feels like, with public institutions in the U.S. about why do people engage with them? Why do students want to come? Why do alumni want to engage? Why do people donate? And there are administrators whose background is in liberal arts education or it's in smaller institutions, and they oftentimes want to build the small public or the small private liberal arts experience, but have it be en masse for public students at places like Indiana. But when you look at where Indiana's made its biggest strides as a national brand, as a university, it was that period when they were winning basketball titles in the 70s and 80s. And then it's been here really in the last year or two when they've been really good at football. I mean, applications are way up. The alumni pride in the institution in terms of like feeling like there's something successful that everybody can feel a part of and point to has been there. And, there were a lot of great academic accomplishments under Michael McRobbie. It's not to denigrate that at all. It's just, it didn't really galvanize alumni. It didn't galvanize donors. It didn't galvanize students in the same way that athletic success does. And I've always been a believer. I've been in higher ed now for 20 years. I don't think it's not a choice that you have to make between being great at athletics and being great at academics. These things can live together. These things can work in tandem with one another. And frankly, I think a lot of academics get jealous of the attention that athletics garners and feel like it's taking away from what they're doing as being important. And it's like, well, athletics is a front door. Athletics is a front door for new students, for people to know about your institution, for people to feel like they want to donate to your institution that have been there in the past. And I think that, what President Whitten has done very well in this process is understand that a place like Indiana works best when their national profile in athletics is strong, and it doesn't have to detract from the academic programs that are under the umbrella of the university as well. And so that, to me, is an important lesson for all institutions to learn. But it's funny because I'll see a lot of higher ed institutions, particularly public ones, go through these boom and bust cycles where you'll get someone in who'll be like, well, we're going to really put the focus back on academics. And then the reputation of the organization suffers because there's not that sense of communal pride that you'll often get through higher ed athletics.
Yeah, and I think the Big Ten Network carried quite a bit of an interview with her and Scott, and she did a really good job. The message, really, the motto from comms is really like Tennessee has their thing that they're the everything school, and in many regards they are. But Pam does a really good job of putting the focus on like we try to be excellent in everything we do, and that includes athletics. So she's never like sliding the academic side of it. Now, some professors that might watch this might have a different take on that, possibly. But I think her knowledge of college athletics and seeing the importance of it, and then trusting Scott Dolson is really important. And the next thing I want to shift to is really, does this buy Scott Dolson? Does it buy patience with the fan base and the alums as basketball tries to get their feet under themselves? Because for those that aren't aware, everybody knows rosters turnover, but basketball has an entire new roster. Their one commit from previous staff did come as a freshman, but the whole team has never played together. I knew Darian DeFries from my time working at Indiana State Athletics. He made my son cry by beating us in the Missouri Valley Championship. We all thought that we would still be an at-large to the tournament. We weren't. They went when he was at Drake, and then he goes to West Virginia, and then he is there for 1 year, and then Scott gets him. My personal opinion is it was a really good hire, and that it's going to just take some time to figure this out. But when you look at personalities, I feel like a lot of the personalities are similar between him and Cignetti. Not as extreme as Cignetti, but like as far as a program builder, just for me watching him in the Valley and then what he did in year one at West Virginia. But I don't know. Do you think it buys people time? If you check IU Twitter, no, it won't. But I think some people, you win a football championship, be a little more patient with the person making the decision on who the basketball coach is.
Oh yeah, no, I think there's patience. I've joked on my podcast that I think that Darren DeVries might have the easiest first year of any IU basketball coach in history because all the attention is on football right now. Personality-wise, I think Darren DeVries is growing into the job. I think it's a tough draw to have to go try and pull in a brand new roster with only one incoming recruit and figure out a way to coalesce it around a coherent system of playing basketball. So I think most people understand that. It's just like, it's going to take a while to get people on board and excited about basketball again, because there's just been a lot of damage done to the relationship between the program and the fans over the last 10 to 15 years. And there's a variety of reasons for that, and it's no one thing. But if you stop winning at a high level for a long time, which essentially is what's happened with IU basketball, you're going to get some melt, even at a place like IU that is so fundamentally rooted in the game of basketball and feeling like they should be one of the top teams in the country, and they just aren't. So, will the hire work out? I mean, I think it's got all the earmarks of it being a good hire. I think that there's an extra complication given that Michigan hired Dusty May, who's a native son of Southern Indiana and IU, and he's now having tremendous success at Michigan. But I think Darren DeVries can carve his own pathway here, and I think it's got some cover. But I do think in this era of college athletics, there's a shorter leash regardless of what the situation is. And I think the big question mark now is how quickly can you get the experiment off the ground? And, IU has always put their basketball program forward as one of the premier programs in the country. You can't do that on the one hand and say, well, have infinite patience on the other hand. You either have standards or you don't. And this is actually where Cignetti almost does make it a little more complicated, because that football program went from 3-9 to 11-2 in 1 year. Basketball, it's almost easier to turn something around quickly. So I don't know if there's as much cushion as there might have been in a previous era, but I do think the football success gives a little more cover than it would have been if there hadn't been that.
And then I kind of wanted the last thing I want to get your take on before I give closing thoughts is I think it's a coping mechanism, but a lot of people nationally are thinking this only happened because of Mark Cuban. And I think it's the most overstated thing, and I'm not trying to be biased by saying that. Cuban was very adamant when he donated the first time to the Mark Cuban Center about it wasn't a big gift. And then, yes, he did come on board with NIL, but he was not the person starting this. I mean, you think with the Cignetti era, it was really the collective, Pete Yonkman and other people that really built this out in some really hard work. And yes, he came along, but what is your take on that when you hear people kind of just mention, they try to pass it off like, yeah, well, when you have a billionaire Mark Cuban?
I mean, people love to latch on to lazy narratives, and it's funny to me because obviously I've been pretty connected in the NIL space for a while. There are some well-heeled donors that have helped to make all of this possible for IU, and I mean, it's great to have Mark Cuban on board now, but there's a core of people that have been ponying up money to help make this happen for a while. But it's the same at all institutions. Like this idea that somehow Indiana's got this singular billionaire sugar daddy donor that's making it all possible. When people say that, I was like, oh, you really don't understand how NIL operates, period. And that's par for the course, I've found, when you talk about college athletics. There's a lot of things people think they understand but don't. Look, the reality is Indiana, the success that they have had has largely been, it goes back a lot to Scott Dolson. Like Scott Dolson, when it became clear with the Supreme Court ruling in 2021 that this was it's open, NIL's open, they were very proactive in figuring out what's the best approach to take. How are we going to organize this? Who are we going to get involved? They formed an NIL collective that had a direct tie with some of the biggest donors that were interested in football at the time, and they figured out a mechanism that easily allowed them to get resources that they needed, not just for NIL, but also for things like Curt Cignetti's contract and some of the other things that have gone along with building the football program. So my whole thing with it is when you don't understand how big the IU alumni base is, and when you don't understand how many people in that alumni base care about sports and want to give money to support sports, it's easy to just latch on to the first name that you can think of that's got money that's involved in sports. But, as appreciative as I know IU is of Mark Cuban getting involved, the groundwork for this was laid long before he decided to really get involved on the football side.
Yeah, and some closing things, and you can piggyback off anything I say here, but it's a lot of this is going to be people can go back to their do their own research. I'm trying to pull in basic things that they can go down a rabbit hole and check with. But what I like right now, under this leadership, the no alternative jerseys in the Cignetti era. I noticed that. So IU has a really good branding guidebook, and it's really long. And I did not like when we went back to the Mallory era jerseys under Tom Allen towards the end of his tenure, and we expect all 24 teams to wear the same look, and then all of a sudden we're rolling out there in very off color maroon jerseys, the white jerseys with the black jerseys against Cincinnati. And I was just glad, we stopped doing the 10 different helmet styles. It's just we got simple, and I think that's under Curt Cignetti. Adidas is going to make you wear certain things, but like I noticed with football, it was every week it was the same thing and very good, clean brand. I also like that in Jeremy Gray, a big credit to this. There's stuff you can find about not this mascot necessarily, but Bison the mascot I think was rolled out really well, and that really kind of anchored in some young fans and families. I know it did with my kid. My 10-year-old went as Hoosier the Bison for Halloween, and he's not a bandwagon fan. He's been a fan since I worked there, and he was
Awesome.
scoring fake touchdowns at Memorial Stadium. And then the kind of final thing there is IU athletics leadership is stable, and what I mean by that is I've had people tell me in the past that like if you're trying to be an aspiring AD or you're trying to be an aspiring administrator, don't go to places where people don't move on because that means they're probably going to get lazy, they're going to get comfortable. And I don't know if they did that because Fred wasn't like that. Scott, was kind of behind the scenes. But like one thing I think Cignetti's success really did do is it got people to not be comfortable on this. I mean, you look at Jeremy Gray, you look at really just Steven as the deputy AD. I was bummed to see Maddie White leave. She was a mentor of mine and really good. But if you look at the senior staff of IU athletics, they have all been there pretty much for like a decade or more.
Mm-hmm.
And they hired internal with Scott, and the people don't want to move on, but they're not resting on their laurels. Everybody seems to be hitting on all cylinders on trying to capitalize on this success right now. And I just think kudos to all of them. So any commentary on any of those directions as we near the end?
Yeah, just a couple quick points. I mean, I think the uniform switching and everything you talked about early on, I mean, that really was very prevalent under the Kevin Wilson era as well, at least with the helmets. But whether it was that or whether it was under Allen, let's be realistic. Like IU football just never had an identity. And I think the idea was, well, we can shift our identity until we find something that really works. Well, what they found was an identity that's built in winning and in process. And that's what Curt Cignetti brought them. And I think Cignetti wants that to be the focus. And that's a great organizational tool. That's a great way to run a business if you've got the goods, so to speak. As far as the athletic, the only thing about IU athletics is I still think it's understaffed. I think there's a lot of work, Herculean efforts being pulled off by a lot of people in IU athletics for what is a pretty small staff compared to what they have to manage, and now managing a national championship football team. They need more help. You look at the size of the staffs at much larger athletic departments, and I'm really impressed with what Indiana pulls off. And I mean, I work with them regularly. It's a great group of people to work with, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that modernizes as we move forward as well, because as I've been telling people, winning a national championship in football changes literally everything overnight. And what that means, you don't always know in the first month or the first 6 months or even the first year. But the expectations from fans, the expectations in terms of licensing, the expectations in terms of sponsorship and revenue and all the other things that you have to do as an athletic department, this is where the rubber starts to hit the road. And there's tremendous people over there. I think they need some additional support to really fully maximize the possibilities that now come out of the success that they've had on the football field.
Yeah, my oldest son keeps asking me, Daddy, when are you gonna go back to work at IU athletics? And I was like, well, if they ever post a position that I can get, maybe I'll go back. But and then to end it, the thing I don't think I want to draw it back to one last thing of hiring coaches, because I've never been the final person to hire a coach. I've helped with hiring coaches earlier in my career, but you talked about Cignetti as well. The final points I'll hit on, and then we'll wrap. I really think you talked about the staff consistency. And the reason I bring this up is I don't think anyone replicated this in the coaching cycle. And part of it might have been because the coaching cycle really happened before IU won the national championship. And you couldn't wait And I don't think there was people that fully believed in IU and that saw until the national stage these types of things. But you look at it, staff consistency, results stacking, specifically at the quarterback position. Every time he goes somewhere, his quarterback gets better. And we saw that with Heisman Doza, and we'll probably see that with Josh Hoover. And someone had asked on another interview, can they just do that every year? I was like, I think they can,
Yeah.
because if you're a quarterback and you want to get better, you're going to go to whoever can do it best. The other thing is he's mentioned about his efficient practice style, wear and tear. It's basically like the NFL model. Like when they changed the CBA a long time ago, you practice a lot less, you hit a lot less, and I think that helps. Also, you're going to get good coaches that want to stay because they're not being thinking they have to be there literally day to night, and they can have a life if they're efficient. And then the last thing I'll go to when we talk about position profile of a hiring a coach, I think it can't be underestimated or overstated enough that in this world of roster turnover every year, the fact that he was an evaluator and a recruiting person for early in his career for Nick Saban, I don't think that that is talked about enough. That he can find, if a position coach, they know what he likes. If they show him some tape, he knows what to look for. And I think that you have some coaches that are not going to be used to this roster turnover year over year, and they're going to rely more on the stars next to the player's name versus what Coach Cignetti brings.
Yeah, no, I mean, with all those points, I think are good. I'll just address the last one, which is, the Cignetti was a recruiting coordinator for Nick Saban. It's funny because you say early in his career, and it was 15, 20 years ago, but it was also about midway through his career because he had been an assistant like starting in the mid 80s. And so what I think is so remarkable about Cignetti, and he actually mentioned this on the podcast with Urban Meyer and Mark Ingram that he did the other day. Like, this is a guy who in his whole career as a head coach has never had depth. He's never had sufficient depth at any of the positions. He's at Division II, or he's at Elon, or he's at James Madison when they're in FCS. And you're scraping nickels together there, trying to put together a roster that's going to work. You really learn resource allocation. You learn scarcity. You learn, like, what is it that really makes a player good at each position. And that's the marvel to me. And it's the thing, you'll get organizations, athletics programs that'll try to hire the next Cignetti. What they're not going to get is his superior talent evaluation abilities and his understanding of how to develop that talent when it gets to him. And I think you're right. Like, I've talked about this on some of my shows. There's a lot of coaches, particularly in the SEC, who have just gotten used to having more talent than everybody else because they can stockpile it, because the SEC for a long time was the only conference where you were regularly seeing players getting paid. Now that the economy is open, so to speak, and guys will be able to go somewhere to get opportunities to play, it's an inefficient model to pay for a lot of young talent that isn't going to play for a couple of years. And so that's what we're watching is Moneyball, but it's beyond that when it comes to college football. We may be watching just the entire reorganization of a sport around rules changes that had unintended consequences. It's not a whole lot different from what happened in the NBA when they changed the player movement rules and somebody decided they were going to finally start emphasizing the three-point line. It just completely altered the way the game was played through what most people didn't think was going to be that big of a deal. And that's kind of how I view this. And Indiana's really lucky. They happened to get the exact right coach who had the exact right philosophy for this exact moment.
Yeah, and I'll end it by saying Scott Dolson was a student manager for Bob Knight, and he saw this type of mindset, and so I think that's just an important thing. And since you're a professor, I've mentioned this before to people. I also think what doesn't hurt, IU does have very flexible graduate programs that students can be attracted to when they come here. And yes, a lot of them are online, or it's these shorter terms that they can get through programs. But it's not just your undergrad offerings. It's what kind of academic offerings do you have for people that are going to transfer in? What can you sell them on? Hey, like, stack these credentials. And I think that can't be understated enough either. Is IU has really good academic programs, like we started talking about. And I think people think that these athletes aren't doing anything when they're at school. No, a lot of them, from my experience, were getting executive Kelly MBA programs, or they're doing stuff like that. That, yes, does really help them one day. I promise you. And so I'll end it there, and I'll keep you for a second after if I close this out. But Dr. Galen Clavio, thanks so much. I think what I really wanted out of this was for me not to just give my take on like why I think this all works from someone that is a practitioner that is going to have to make these same type of scenarios at the school they're working at. And I hope none of them ever beat IU, that because we helped them come up with this blueprint. But I do hope that it helps them in their own careers as well. So thank you for joining me on Higher Ed Athletics.
Thanks, Travis.